between the ages of 18 and 40, I logged about 20,000 miles hitchhiking. It was a dangerous thing to do, but I came up with my own rules to try and reduce the risk. Like, I would never get into a vehicle if it had 2 or more men in it. I also had a bunch of techniques to help me get rides quickly. For example, instead of having a sign, I would have a sign. Hitchhiking was always an adventure because I never knew who was going to pick me up. Sometimes it would be a lonely businessman wanting conversation. Too many times it would be an evangelical Christian trying to save me. A lot of times, especially when I was in my younger years, it was a gay man, and we might flirt, and sometimes we would do more than just flirt. And if they were like 20 to 30 years older than me, sometimes I would entice them to pay me for sex. One of the most memorable experiences of my life was because of hitchhiking. I was summoned to court in Clifton Forge, Virginia, a small town right off of Interstate 64, because I had committed the offense of hitchhiking. The traffic court judge looked to be about 70 years old, gray hair, thick glasses, and he was stern. Every single person who went before me and pled not guilty, there was about a dozen of them, all were quickly found guilty and ordered to pay a fine. Then it was my turn. I pled not guilty on religious grounds. I testified that my beliefs were similar to the Quaker tradition of following one's inner light, and that mine motivated me to get rid of almost all of my belongings. I was intentionally homeless so I could give as much as I could. I mentioned that at that time, or I had just recently obtained my master's in social work degree, and now I was working as a full-time administrator as a volunteer for a nonprofit organization. I stated that if I had to get my own car or pay for public transportation, I could not lead the lifestyle that I felt called to. I quoted the Bible, where Jesus said, "Sell all your possessions and give to the poor and come follow me." I also quoted Martin Luther King, who said the question is not whether to be an extremist, but what kind of an extremist? An extremist for love or for hate? For justice or injustice? I rested my case. And the judge was silent. He looked at the warrant, and I think he noticed that I came from Charleston, West Virginia, 150 miles away. And he said, "How did you get here?" I hitchhiked. He nodded. "If I impose a fine, do you have the funds to pay it?" Well, I did not bring enough money to pay a fine because I have no intention of paying a fine. He nodded again. And he was silent again. And he looked at the paper again. Then he said, "When you go through my jurisdiction, I expect you to obey the law. In fact, I insist upon it. You were given a summons for being near the top of the entrance ramp to the highway. It's legal to hitchhike from the bottom. Stay there in the future. But you seem sincere, and I don't want to put you in jail. This case is dismissed." Bang! You know, every single one of my friends thought that I was absolutely nuts for risking jail over a traffic violation. But of course, to me, it was something much more than that. It had to deal with my deepest conviction. We all have convictions, just as we all have a sex drive. And both of mine were expressed, I would say, rather differently. It kind of reminds me of the Robert Frost thing where there's two roads going into the woods and he chooses the one less traveled. Well, Mr. Frost didn't realize that there was a third road that was so overgrown from being so rarely traveled. But I noticed it, and I took it, and that made all the difference.